A new Fox News poll shows Trump leading Biden by 3 points, with independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in third place at 11%. Even with the showing, Biden is refusing to allow Kennedy on the debate stage, or he's also refusing to give him any Secret Service protection that is provided to major presidential candidates. All of this time, Kennedy has not been offered such a service. This, despite the tragic history of the Kennedy family that saw the assassination of both his father, Robert F. Kennedy, and his uncle, President John F. Kennedy. Joining me right now in the Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is the man himself, presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Mr. Kennedy, thanks very much for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me, Maria.
So your reaction to you not being offered this position, have you heard from the campaigns or from CNN or ABC to ask your plausibility of being on that debate stage?
We are in discussions with CNN. CNN published a list of criteria, 4 criteria for candidates getting in the debate, and we have shown CNN that we meet all of those criteria, and that President Trump and President Biden cannot meet those criteria. The key, one of the two sort of key criterion is that every candidate has to be on the ballots in enough states to get 270 electoral votes by June 20th. And we will qualify for that. President Trump and President Biden cannot qualify for that because they don't have any electoral votes at this time. They are presumptive nominees for their party, but they themselves are not on the ballot. I will be the only one on the ballot. The other criterion is 4 polls that have me at 15% national polls, and they listed the polling firms that they would take those polls from, and we've given them 5 national polls that show me, including the CNN poll, the most recent CNN poll that has me at 15%, the Harvard-Harris poll, the Monmouth poll, the Quinnipiac poll, that all have me at 15% or more. So I qualify for the debates. They have now made a public offer. We consider that a contract, and we're in discussion with CNN now.
So why do you have this sure assurance that you think you'll be eligible for the 270 electoral votes by June 20th? Do you think you'll get those votes by June 20th?
Yeah, we'll be on the ballot. We already have. We have enough signatures today or 201 electoral votes. By the end of the month, we'll be at 340.
Okay. Why do you think they're keeping you off the debate stage then, sir?
I think they don't want to talk about the issues that neither President Trump or President Biden are comfortable talking about. These 2 presidents ran up the biggest deficit in history. That's now driving the inflationary cycle in this country. President Trump, in 4 short years, ran up $8 trillion in debt. It's more debt, more money spent than every president combined from George Washington to George W. Bush. And President Biden is rushing to keep up with them. The 2 of them shut down our country, shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, no scientific citation. They're the ones who are feeding the toxic polarization that is tearing our country apart. Both of these candidates say that they want to end the polarization, but they have no way to do that. They're actually feeding into it. They are the product of that polarization. If we're going to save our country, we need to start looking at each other as Americans again.
Yeah.
And stop hating on each other. Both of these candidates have fed this, the forever wars. President Trump said that he was going to end them, but then, he again supported last week $663 billion more to Ukraine. So all of these issues are issues that neither of them want to talk about, and I'm going to make them talk about it, and they're not going to want to do that.
Well, let's talk a little about it right now so our viewers understand clearly where you are on these issues. Number 1, immigration and the wide open border. Would you move to deport the 10 million illegals that are in this country on Joe Biden's watch?
I would shut down the border overnight. And I've been to the border. Everybody there is confident. I've spoken to the Border Patrol, local law enforcement, people on both sides of the border. local hospitals and local officials, and everybody is confident that we can shut this border overnight, which is destroying our country.
Would you deport the illegals that are already here?
We would deport a lot of them. I don't know, I don't want to tear apart families. People who are in this country, have been in this country for a long time and are paying taxes. We need to look at that population. And I'm not making any policy commitments on that until the border is shut, because I don't think Americans will put up with it.
Second issue, inflation rising to 40-year highs, largely because of $7 trillion in borrowing and spending of the Democrats. How would you rein in inflation?
Well, I mean, we need to stop the spending. And in order to do that, we need to wind down the war machine, which neither candidate is able to do. We need to end the chronic disease epidemic, which these two candidates have presided over, which is costing us now $4.3 trillion a year. That's 5 times our military budget. It is the single biggest cost in our entire budget. We need, and all of these things are things that neither President Trump or President Biden is even talking about doing.
Okay.
President Trump promised that he would balance the budget, and instead he ran up the biggest deficit in history. And again, President Biden's doing the same thing, and that's why we have $4 milk and $4 bread and $6 gasoline, and our houses are now unaffordable. We have a whole generation of kids that are not going to get into homes, and we need to solve that housing crisis as well.
Mr. Kennedy, let me ask you your thoughts on abortion. Do you believe a woman should have the right to have an abortion even in her 9th month?
No, what I've said is that the government has an interest in regulating abortion when the baby reaches viability. And before that, a woman has an absolute right over bodily autonomy, and I've been fighting for bodily autonomy, for medical freedom, probably far harder than anybody in this country over the past 20 years. And at some point, when the baby, in the last couple of months, when the baby reaches viability, the government has an interest in protecting that child.
Mr. Kennedy, I want to get your take on what has taken place in terms of your battle with President Biden in terms of Secret Service protection. Have you been able to get Secret Service protection? I know that you've been asking. I've been watching your tweets and you're following you on social media. Why is President Biden refusing to allow you to have security?
I'm the first candidate, and well, candidates became eligible for Secret Service protection after my father's assassination in 1968. I'm the first presidential candidate in all of that time who has requested Secret Service protection and has not gotten it. The Secret Service themselves have made an assessment and have found that I am at elevated risk. I've had several very worrying incidences since I declared my candidacy, including a man showing up demanding to see me in my green room at a rally in Los Angeles with shoulder holsters and many other guns on him, loaded weapons.
Unbelievable.
And fake federal ID. I've made 6 applications to the White House to get Secret Service protection. President Biden is not allowing me to get it. So I think probably I can't really look into his head and speculate as to why he's made this decision. He has a bust of my dad behind him at the Oval Office. I know he probably knows what happened to my father. Oh, I think the risks are clear. I think that they probably feel that they are able to force me to pay for my own security, and that they'd rather me spend that money on security than on advertising or organization.
Look, this is outrageous, and everybody knows that you deserve security for sure. It's unbelievable that you're not getting it. But let me get your take on this. You heard what Greg Murphy said at the top of the show. Mr. Kennedy, do you believe that President Biden should take a drug test before the debate?
I just think that he should have to debate. I think that, I don't think it's good for democracy if we don't have presidential debates. And I think that the candidates ought to debate. They ought to debate the people, you know, all the people who meet the criteria. And
including
the criteria.
yourself. Yeah. And so you don't want to even touch that. You're not going to touch that in terms of a drug test.
No, I'm not going to go there, but
Okay.
I just want them on the debate stage.
Well, look, your family has been associated in politics. You've grown up in politics. What have you learned from this entire process, sir?
Well, I think, Maria, one of the reasons I got into the race was because of my feeling that we're losing touch with this vision of what America is supposed to look like, that we're supposed to be a moral authority around the world, that we're supposed to be the exemplary democracy, that people in our country ought to be living the American dream. You know, the central promise of the American dream when I was a kid was that if you worked hard, if you paid by the rules, you could finance a home, you could take a summer vacation, you could put something aside for your retirement on one job. Yeah. There's nobody in this generation of kids who are coming up now who believe that that promise applies to them, and I want to make them feel like they can take advantage of the American dream as well, and neither of these candidates are explaining how that's going to happen.
Are you planning on doubling down on the climate change agenda in terms of environmentalism, Mr. Kennedy? I want to get your take because a lot of criticism about President Biden's climate change agenda, particularly from business. He's inserted lots of new rules about climate change and the impact there. What are your plans there, sir?
I've been critical of President Biden's climate. First of all, I believe that climate change is existential. I don't have problems with people who don't believe that. I believe that. I focus on other issues, on issues that all the things that we need to do to solve climate change, we ought to be doing anyway. I think President Biden's approach, which is an approach of very, very heavy top-down controls and of subsidies to industry for carbon capture technologies, that is a bad approach. We ought to be talking about habitat protection. We ought to be talking about reducing toxins in our environment. We ought to be talking about rebuilding our soils. We ought to be talking about protecting our children from air pollution and water pollution. This is what I've done for 40 years. I've been a champion of those issues. And if we do those issues right, the climate is going to take care of itself.
Mr. Kennedy, we'd like to keep in touch with you to see where these negotiations go with CNN. We'd like to see whether or not you're going to make it on that debate stage or the debate has been set. We so appreciate your time this morning, sir. Thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.